When the Titanic sank in April 1912, it instantly became one of the most famous maritime disasters ever recorded. But there are other stories of Titanic proportion. And for Japan, that is the story of the Toyamaru train ferry. But when you research the story, you can see that there are facts written into Wikipedia and other websites that, like the Toyamaru, simply don't hold water. By the early 1900s, rail has become a major part of transporting people and cargo around Japan. Networks of rail lines join stations all over the country. However, Japan is an archipelago made up of a series of islands and not connected by bridges or tunnels. Trains arriving in port towns would disembark their passengers and cargo would be transferred to a ship to make the crossing from one island to another. This time-consuming and costly process is replaced by train ferries designed to allow a train to roll onto the ferry in one port and directly onto the train tracks at the next port. While this speeds up the process, there are several factors to consider. A train is not a light piece of equipment, and so it needs to be balanced quite carefully. When a train rolls onto a ferry, it's almost impossible to place the train on the lowest deck of the ferry. This means the center of gravity is pushed upwards. A higher center of gravity is less stable than a low center of gravity. In order to combat this, ferry designers created sea doors. These doors are lowered to allow the trains to roll onto a lower deck and then closed again for the voyage. Seals on such large doors that double as a ramp for the trains are inherently weak, which means it's possible for water to leak in when exposed to rough weather. It's near impossible to compartmentalize the decks when a train runs the full length of a ferry. If water gets into the ferry, it'll have free run of the entire deck. The weight of a train is difficult to completely stabilize. If a train shifts its position, it would break any type of restraints used to hold it in place. Of course, everything is done to stabilize the trains. Brakes are applied and trains are chained to the deck. Passengers and cargo remain in the train for a crossing, although on a long voyage the passengers can leave the train and stretch their legs and walk around the ship. The Toyamaru launched in November 1947. She is 389 feet long and 52 feet wide at her beam, and she has a gross registered tonnage of 3,898 gross tons. Gross registered tonnage is a ship's internal volume. Each registered ton is 100 cubic feet. She's a steam-powered train ferry owned by Japanese National Railways and built by Mitsubishi. The Toyamaru covers a voyage from Aomori to Hakodate, which is about a 4.5-hour passage. She can accommodate 1,128 passengers with a further 120 crew. On the 26th of September 1954, the Toyamaru makes her first crossing of the day from Aomori to Hakodate and arrives safely at 1100. She's scheduled to return to Aomori later that day at 1440. However, Typhoon Marie is expected to reach the Tsugaru Strait at around 1700. Another smaller vessel cancels its departure on the same route and all the vehicles and passengers are transferred to the sturdier Toyamaru. This delays the departure of the Toyamaru, which would have completed its journey to Aomori before the typhoon hit. As the weather picks up, at 15:10 the captain decides to delay the departure. The passengers wait patiently in their carriages and in the terminal for the storm to dissipate. By 1700, the worst of the weather has passed and the captain prepares to depart. The train ferry departs the port at 1839 with almost 1,331 people and fully laden with cargo, including cars and train carriages. The captain has mistimed his departure because Typhoon Marie has not passed. It's merely slowed down. Now that the Toyamaru is out of the port and sailing into the bay, the typhoon picks up steam and the sea state grows with the wind strengthening from the south-southeast. The captain has a choice to make. He can attempt to make the crossing, but with the weather picking up, he's sure that in deeper water the conditions will be far worse. He could try and run back to port, but in the current sea state it's too dangerous. The ferry would likely smash into the port in the rolling waves. That means his best option is to stay in the shallow bay, cast anchor and ride out the storm. At 19:01, the Toyamaru drops anchor in the bay outside the port of Hakodate. But the anchor does not bite, and so the Toyamaru leaves the anchor down and motors forward slowly to hold the bow into the waves and pointing towards the oncoming swell and wind. For a number of hours, the ferry rolls precariously over the swell and waves. The wind howls and the passengers huddle in their carriages. Every time the ship rolls over the crest of a wave, the train carriages test their restraints. The passengers can feel the weight of the train carriages shift slightly. The action of the wave and the wind is causing the ferry to start taking on water, which runs into the lower decks. At 2200, the anchor breaks free and the Toyamaru begins to drift. The captain tries to navigate the ship into deeper water, but the engine compartments have taken on water and the steam engines are snuffed. At 22:26, the Toyamaru runs aground on the rocks of Nane Beach and the captain sends out a mayday call. The sea swell and gale force winds push her beam on between the wind and the rocks. The beam of a ship is the length of her side. This is the worst position for a ship because in swell and waves it rolls uncontrollably from side to side with every wave that hits. Under constant pressure from the sea state, the rail cars break their restraints. Passengers are crushed as the carriages topple. As the weight of the carriages shifts, they further destabilize the ferry. At 22:43, the Toyamaru capsizes. She sinks a few hundred meters off the shore of Hakodate with 1,331 people on board. 1,172 people lose their lives, including the captain of the Toyamaru. If you read the articles about this accident, you'll see that the description is slightly different from what I have put forward here. The commonly reported sequence of events is that the engines are snuffed by water and then the captain decides to beach the vessel. If the engines are snuffed first, then the captain has already lost control and he can't take a decision to beach because he has no engine to propel the ferry towards the beach. The ferry is at the mercy of the sea. In addition to that, I find it hard to believe any captain would take a decision to beach such a vessel on purpose. The ferry has a V-shaped hull. The captain would be very aware that this shape of hull would cause the ferry to topple if beached. She could not stand upright on a V-shaped hull. If he beached her on purpose, he signed her death warrant. Despite what's written in Wikipedia and other reports, the final say is given to the second mate, who's the highest rank to survive. In his testimony about the incident, he says, "We put the anchor down outside the breakwater, but we could not fix the anchor. We ran the engine at full speed against the wind, but both engines stopped at 10 o'clock. The ship was beaten by the rough waves and hit rocks at 10:26. The ship turned over about 7 to 8 minutes after that." As a result of this accident, a decision was taken to develop the Saikan Tunnel, which is the world's longest undersea tunnel beneath the Tsugaru Strait. The Saikan Tunnel runs almost 34 miles and is 790 feet below sea level. It opened on the 13th of March 1988, which marked the same day for the final crossing of a Saikan Railroad ferry boat. The Japanese press labeled the Toyamaru the Titanic of Japan.